Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dwindlers, kindlers, and Tinder swindlers, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel, where we discuss books and little else, and welcome back to Random Reviews, my series known for being neither random, because I, of course, compile a TBR at the start of every month, and neither being strictly anything that could be honestly or earnestly defined as a review, because, of course, I either lampoon or lambast, or just commend something. I don't really get into the analytical gristle of anything, but nonetheless, here we are again. Just a few more, additional bits of housekeeping at the start. This is my little reference point for you, if you can see so. I have many of my socials on here, as many ridiculously svelte and insouciant influences have. This is my OnlyFans account, Assonance Unveiled. For the princely sum of about, I think it's about $17 a month, you get access both, of course, to this content and anything that happens below the waist. If you want to see my gonads swinging whilst I regale you with all of my literary conclusions, then of course that in the free market capitalism is available to you. And then of course we just have my Instagram, which is Joe_Spivey _. But yes, my OnlyFans Assonance Unveiled. If you're feeling particularly pent up, or particularly inhibited, or particularly lewd and licentious, and you want to give your money to a good cause, then of course just pop down there, and I'm sure you will be satisfied. But nonetheless, if I can stably produce for you, this is Anthony Trollope's 1875 novel, The Way We Live Now. By far his longest, and it is, oh my goodness, a species apart from that which I have encountered from him before, and many critical analyses have told me that it's extraordinarily different to anything that he ever wrote. It hasn't got that. It still has aspects of, but isn't solely defined as something that is really very comfortable, really warm, really welcoming, touchy-feely, pops you into his nicest armchair in front of his most gorgeous fire and tells you about the lovable Septimus Harding, bits of Archdeacon Grantley, how these people are, at least not to be morally frowned upon, all these wonderful people, yada, yada, yada. That is not the case. This is paint-strippingly critical, absolutely scintillating, and ripped through with all sorts of excoriative material on the prevailing social visions of Trollope's day, the zeitgeist of the appreciation of money and the ubiquity of avarice, and yada, yada, yada. I needn't go on about that. So this is the story of, we originally meet Lady Carbury, Matilda Carbury, who is a witty, wry, sightly, very, 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 beautiful, and yet driven middle-aged woman who was married a bit of a wastrel who was passed on, and now she has the burden of 2 children to look after. She writes a book called The Criminal Queens, which she sends around the houses, which gets reviewed and is reasonably successful in its day, but she is nonetheless pretty impecunious. She cannot count on herself to look after her 2 children, who are Henrietta and Sir Felix, the latter of which is a hedonistic, arrogant, penniless scoundrel who is completely and unalterably unconscious of any vicissitudes or difficulty of others. He is a classic solipsist who thinks that the world was just sort of grown for him in a lab in order for him to enjoy and plunder and for nobody else to be considered. Goodness me, if this gentleman was given TikTok or polysaturated fats, then he would be a complete boondoggle to everybody. He is an awful, awful human being. The only redeemable characteristic that he holds is one of his aesthetic prowess. He is continually referred to as pretty beautiful. He's got some nice dark long locks, and is quite suave and svelte and all the rest of it. And in order that he should be he should be looked after, in order that he should be financially stable, Lady Carbury almost compels him to go hunting for a wife, and that just happens to be one of the only daughters of Augustus Melmotte, Monsieur Melmotte, who is a mysteriously alluring figure that doesn't quite make his footprints known in the first sort of 30 or 40 pages of this novel. If somebody reviews this book and immediately mentions Augustus Melmotte, that might ring of the fact they haven't quite read it, because it starts generally with the Carburys and then goes on to, Longstaffs and Montagues much before Melmotte is mentioned. But anyway, Marie Melmotte, the daughter of, Augustus, who is has an ambiguous reputation on both the British and European scene. He is regarded as a swindler by many. He has, put up castles in the sky and struck them down for many. But it cannot be argued, it cannot be issued that he is seemingly a very, very wealthy man. He has a huge house in Grosvenor Square. He has plenty of servants. He's, and he capitalises upon the asset-rich but cash-poor aristocracy, who, of course, are deferent to him, who are sycophantic, who, love anything with a monetary pulse, and so take him in as their own. This is a trope, but it is used, very often, and it is in fact correct. I can speak from personal experience. Myself and my wealthy heiress, we have 37 servants, we have 3 moats, we have a golf course and a tennis lawn, but we don't have 2 halfpennies to rub together. We've still got owls nesting in the east wing, and so it is a very real thing for a nouveau riche and therefore sort of vulgar, unsociable, unnuanced, just a sort of a complete blackguard, but nonetheless you tolerate him because of his wealth. Those people do in fact exist. And Felix Carbury has to marry Marie Melmotte in order to, because they believe, of course, that he will then give an annuity to these couples. He will give them a lump sum, perhaps £50,000, and that's what that section of the book is predicated upon. She also has a daughter, and Felix has a sister called Henrietta Carbury, who is pushed into marrying her second cousin, Roger Carbury, who is, of course, a relation of the deceased, I believe, who is perhaps the only morally admirable person in this book who also happens to be capable. Those are 2 different distinctions which I would like to draw. There are a few morally admirable people. Henrietta's pretty good. Mrs. Hurstel is one of them, who I'll get into. Ruby Raggles. But neither of those people are capable. Roger is the only person who has it in his ability to enact change in the world and is also not a complete and utter abhorrent scoundrel. So she is pushed into the arms of Roger, who is very keen. Absolutely nothing would please him more than to have her forever in his arms, but unfortunately she admires him, and she knows that he has a backbone and a spine, unlike every other hominid in her immediate social milieu, but cannot stomach marrying him, cannot sexualise him, cannot imagine loving him and deeming him a lovable human being. And so they vacillate between, love and hatred, and the one person that she does seem to fancy, if we were to use a horrid modern neologism, is Paul Montague, who has, funnily enough, pretty much been brought up by Roger Carbury. He was of decent stock in Caversham, but whose parents didn't see by him very well, and has been brought up and advised every turn of his life by Roger Carbury, and therefore you have the first bit of frisson, where it's known by by all 3 poles of the love triangle that they want Miss Carbury, and yet it very often can't come to fruition. And then, connected to Paul Montague, ladies and gentlemen, we have a bloke, I think it's called Harold Fisker, who, it must be said that Montague's been jetting up and down the coast to San Francisco. He's been to America, he's been to all sorts of places, and has speculated. And Harold Fisker, who is a sort of male business associate of his, comes across with what would be regarded nowadays as a Ponzi scheme. It is a South Central Pacific and Mexican Railway, which will be flogged as a economically viable project for a railway from, my American geography isn't what it once was, but it's going to go from there to there, essentially. And none of the tracks have been laid, none of the land has been leased, I don't think. Nothing that would generally be considered, but nothing that's been no outsourced teams have been brought in. It's all, it's all phantom, it's all fugazi, it's all speculation. And yet, as the modern Ponzi schemes go, Fisker goes up to Augustus Melmotte, who is a contact of Paul Montague's, and says, look, this is a really, really, really excellent option for investment. If only we can hypertrophy the public perception of such a thing, that, of course, will in and of itself increase the amount of investment that comes in, and that will just snowball, and, the old prophecies of returning investments and snowballing will come into play, and before you know it, you've got a little gold mine on your hands when you haven't even parted with a single penny. So that's the railway. Of course, Felix Carbury gets involved. Lord Nidderdale gets involved, who Augustus Melmotte really wants to marry Marie Melmotte. Of course, there's a particularly excellent scene. Felix is indifferent to all. He will nod along when Marie says, "Do you love me?" but he will never actually profess it himself. You can tell that whenever he is sentimental, it's all out of it's more of a recitation of that which he has learnt beforehand. None of it is extemporaneous. None of it is heartfelt. And yeah, he's just a terrible, terrible liar and a lover. But anyway, Marie persuades him to go up to Augustus and say, "Look, I quite fancy your daughter. Any chance that I can have her, mate?" And because, of course, they believe that you know, they're not convinced of the idea, but they think that he will then bequeath them all sorts of blessings and monetary aids as well by doing that. And then he gets into the office and says, "Well, you know, Felix, I would quite like my daughter's potential suitor to already have his place in the world. I should like him to be, you know, really rather sort of monetarily spoken for already. I don't want to be handing out things, and I won't part with a single halfpenny unless I am really... what should I say? Unless I like the person that she's about to marry." And so the very predicate of the entire exercise for Felix and his mother go out the window, and he has to try to convince Augustus that he's a man of the world. Of course he isn't. He's penniless and gambles at the Bear Garden with all of his friends Dolly Longstaff and Miles Grendel, who are utterly abhorrent as well, who partake in all sorts of barbiturate taking and scoundrelry. It's really, 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 it's enviably, it's an enviably lackadaisical and laissez-faire society, it appears, in which they dwell. But then Marie tells Felix that she believes that Augustus has settled some sort of monetary guarantee on her, i.e. if she goes away and is in trouble or perishes, he will suffer financially from it and therefore will look kindly on an elopement, for example. And so they arrange to go via train to Liverpool and ship themselves off to New York in hope that Augustus will forgive them. This, of course, is all pretty much pie in the sky. He's a ruthless man and happens to find out about it all. Felix never even ends up at the railway station. The money that is gathered by Dodin, or Dodine, Marie's portmanteau carrier, is squandered at the club, and he gets drunk, and he also has a woman on the side, Miss Ruby Raggles, who is in Caversham and is naive and destitute, but again, morally admirable, isn't sickening like 85% of the people in this novel. And then you have another side of it, Paul Montague with his New York bride, Mrs. Hurstle. Some of those scenes in which they go to the theatre are excellent. It is still shot through with eloquence with The Way We Live Now, but Trollope isn't nearly as kind, isn't nearly as endearing, doesn't embalm all of his characters with redeemable characteristics. Most of them are utterly foul, who care nothing but of themselves. It's all moral relativism. He did that, therefore I should do this. The many Christians, I believe, would always point to North Star morality, in that, a decent definition of morality is what is done when your eyes are closed or when the door is closed and you are alone. That, of course, is never brought into consideration by nearly anybody. Roger Carbury, as I say, is the only capable and morally admirable human being in here. But there are all sorts of things that we could read from. We've just got to the point. Trollope is leaving little breadcrumbs that would leave us to believe, perhaps, that Augustus Melmotte isn't quite as lavishly endowed as he, as we have been led to believe thus far. He is unwilling to give out. He's now the director of this railway company, and is unwilling to give out many of the fruits of the investment to Felix and to many others. He has a front door and a back door. And often lies to the people in his front waiting room, telling him that he's immensely busy, when in fact, of course, he's just... We are led to believe, again, it's perhaps put to us, it's touted that he might well just be, employing devious schemes. He is also running for the Conservative seat of Westminster. He is due, just at the moment where I am, about halfway through, he is due to give a dinner for the Emperor of China. all of which is probably going to end up with eggs on many faces, but that is the point at which we arrive now. And I'm very much looking forward to the final part. I believe that Augustus is going to end up in a blaze of his own glory. Felix is hopefully going to end up in the same way as well. People made me cognizant of the fact that I'm probably going to despise Felix, and if ever I did happen to like him, then that was more of a reflection on my own moral rectitude than his. But no, I don't like him at all. I nor do I want him to be successful. He is hedonistic and can't look beyond the nose of his own desire. But anyway, I've got a few bits and bobs just to read out. What do I have? So we've talking about, this is an excellent passage on Lady Carbury's initial stance, where she's driven to desperation, monetary desperation, because of the horrors and the furore around her previous marriage, the death of her late husband, yada yada. Sir Patrick had left behind him a moderate fortune, that's her husband, though by no means great wealth. To his son, who was now Sir Felix Carbury, he had left 1,000 a year, and to his widow as much, with the provision that after her death the latter sum should be divided between his son and daughter. It therefore came to pass that the young man, who had already entered the army when his father had died, and upon whom devolved no necessity of keeping a house, and who in fact not unfrequently lived in his mother's house, had an equal income to that with which his mother and sister were obliged to maintain a roof over their head. Now Lady Carbury, when she was released from her thraldom at the age of 40, had no idea at all of passing her future life amidst the ordinary penances of widowhood. The ordinary penances of widowhood. She had hitherto endeavoured to do her duty, knowing that in accepting her position she was bound to take the good and the bad together. She had certainly encountered hitherto much that was bad. And she's a writer. She writes Criminal Queens. She denies the proposal of Mr. Brown, who writes the morning breakfast table, all of whom are also involved in the reputational raising and slashing of Augustus Melmotte as well. Always in Trollope's novels is the importance of the newspapers in the dissemination of either scurrilously terrible information or congratulatory information. The papers form a central part of popular consciousness and public opinion, and that is no different in here. We have an establishment of genuine confliction within Roger Carbury, who knows that the person that he has brought up, Paul Montague, is of course in love. Isn't in love, but is favoured by Henrietta Carbury. In his heart of hearts, he believed that she loved Paul Montague, and of Paul himself he was beginning to fear evil. What but a sham could be a man who consented to pretend to sit at one of a board of directors to manage an enormous enterprise with such colleagues as Lord Alfred Grendel and Sir Felix Carbury, under the absolute control of such a one as Mr. Augustus Melmotte? Was not this building a house upon the sand with a vengeance? What a life it would be for Henrietta Carbury were she to marry a man striving to become rich without labour and without capital, and who might one day be wealthy and next a beggar, a city adventurer who of all men was to him the vilest and most dishonest. He strove to think well of Paul Montague, but such was the life which he feared the young man was preparing for himself. Again, these compound sentences, Trollope never seems to know when is best to put a full stop down. As we know, he was writing as fast as he possibly could. This is talking about the city ruffian or the bloated swindler, Augustus Melmotte, in relation to Sir Felix. The bloated swindler, this is the set piece that I referred to earlier about Felix having to prove his monetary worth. The bloated swindler, the vile city ruffian, was certainly taking a most ungenerous advantage of the young aspirant for wealth. It was then that Sir Felix felt his own position. Was he not a baronet and a gentleman and a very handsome fellow and a man of the world who had been in a crack regiment? If this surfeited sponge of speculation, this crammed commercial cormorant, wanted more than that for his daughter, why could he not say so without asking disgusting questions such as these, questions which it was quite impossible that a gentleman should answer? Was it not sufficiently plain that any gentleman proposing to marry the daughter of such a man as Melmotte would do so under the stress of pecuniary embarrassment? Would it not be an understood bargain that as he provided the rank and position, she would provide the money? And yet the vulgar wretch took advantage of his assumed authority to ask these dreadful questions. But yes, Melmotte is, as I say, he's now the Conservative candidate for Westminster, and which means, of course, that he has to appeal to the public, or not appeal to the public, but appeal to those who will do most to build his public reputation, i.e. the newspapers and a few lords and baronets and people who are already in the Commons. But yes, this is very, very different to anything I've ever read by Trollope before. I'm pretty much just confirming what other people parrot as well. It's not nearly as homely as and welcoming and hospitable as the stuff that I've read before, even the autobiography, which is deemed by all to be cold and sort of scientifically rational, as opposed to anything heartfelt and emotional. But yes, I think I'm wittering on. But yes, that was my random review of the first half of The Way We Live Now. I'll be back towards the end of the week, probably, with another bit of my bookshelf tour, and of course with the finale. And I'm also talking, I believe, with Steve Donoghue in but an hour's time by the time this is out there and published. So yes, thanks ever so much for watching BookTube, and goodbye.